Everyone wants to master this bald bank robber. You see, CYPHER sees a crazy amount of pro play. I mean, it's something like 90% plus. And if you can tap into a fraction of the power level of this agent, then you're going to be able to win game after game. I mean, having a good CYPHER can be like having the ultimate defense, Soldier Revealing Light activated 24/7. So what are we waiting for? Let's break down everything you need to master this Inspector Gadget wannabe. Speaking of wannabe, I'm gonna be sad if you don't smash that subscribe button, so yeah, I would appreciate it. Anyways, kick off your shoes, grab a caffeinated gamer drink, and let's get started. So first off, we gotta break down his bread and butter abilities and big mistakes with them. And I mean huge mistakes, because SPYCAM and Trapwire are two of the most powerful abilities in the entire game. We got to make sure that we perfect these first and then you are not making any mistakes on them before we move on to larger macro and meta strategies involving CYPHER. So first off, the SPYCAM, aka the Eye of Sauron, is very powerful because it can relay information from even off a site constantly that gives you opportunities to make plays, lurk, rotate far quicker, and still get a stream of information while off the point. Unlike the only other information gatherer like Sova, he gets a small burst of information, but it's not a steady stream like SPYCAM. SPYCAM is very uniquely powerful. Now, there are tons of mistakes that people are making using SPYCAMs. Let me list them off here. First off, it's the most obvious one, staying in your cam too long. You want to be fading in and out of your camera. You don't want to be permanently using it because you don't want it to get shot. It's pretty simple because then it shuts down your information and you have to wait an extremely long cooldown in order to get it back, which is a very big deal. It's a huge mistake, but it's a pretty easy one to fix, and most of you will already have this one on point. Now, the second one is tagging people unnecessarily. Now, this is one even higher level players still make, and it's almost like it's instinctual to instantly see an enemy, flick to them, and tag them. But you don't want to let enemies know that you have information on them until the perfect moment for a joint retake. You see, enemies are going to play fundamentally different if they know that you already know their exact location and things like that. And because you're not tagging enemies, this is why it's extremely important to build up that communication skills and be able to call the actual perfect callouts so that you can relay exactly where the enemies are that are near your SPYCAM without actually having to tag them. And then the next question that you might have is, when should I leave my SPYCAM on a point when I'm playing defense, or when should I take it with me to try to use it? Well, first off, if the spike is already planted on the other site, you can just instantly just pick up your SPYCAM if you haven't rotated off already, because they're not going to rotate back, right? So you don't need any information like that. But if you're leaving the point early, pre-rotating, or trying to lurk, it is always best to maintain a sightline on point, because enemies are often going to rotate back, and it's a lot harder to set up a retake with the camera. It's inherently stronger for it to already be on a site when enemies are pushing into it, so you can get that constant stream of information for a potential retake. Pre-rotating or leaving a point early, leave the SPYCAM on the point. Now, the fourth big mistake is a pretty simple one, but stop putting the camera in the exact same spot. Now, I know that there is like your perfect spot, your favorite spot, right? But enemies will start to spray in common spots that you put your camera, especially if they've seen it there already. So if you ever get a camera destroyed in one spot, you need to be not placing it in that spot, maybe never again for the rest of the round. But honestly, you probably just need to let a couple of rounds go by before you place it in the same spot. Pretty simple stuff, right? Now, while all this is apparent, the big question that you might have is, how do you use a camera on attack? Because it's pretty easy to use on defense, but on attack, using SPYCAM or just getting value on CYPHER altogether can be way more difficult. So, camera can actually be used in three big ways on attack. You could peek a sight line or mess up crosshair placement to set up a swing. You throw a camera to a high point that looks down a sight line, and it's either going to not get destroyed and you get information about that sightline without having to peek it yourself, or the second it gets destroyed, an ally can swing the enemy and the enemy's crosshair placement is going to be fundamentally off because they had to look upward to destroy your SPYCAM. This is a pretty valuable way to use it. Now, the most common and consistent way that pro players are using it all over the place from TSM to T1 is they use it as either flank prevention or to set up information during a lurk about where enemies are going and what angles they are crossing. balancing. Take Split, for example, where the majority of your team is actually going to be pushing A site. You are playing sewer, and you can put a camera in mid to catch any enemies that are either flanking through sewer or catch any enemies that are rotating from mid to vent. So this is extremely important because that type of information can be invaluable, and this is probably one of the best ways to use your spy cam. Now, the last way to use it is actually after you already get the plant down. Now, if you get in this scenario and you haven't used your spy cam, then you're great. Then you're just chilling, because being able to peek an angle like heaven, or being able to peek a power angle that an enemy has to actually get to before they can start a swing, can let you set up powerful plays, can help you get information without risking getting fatality'd. There's so much good about this, so this is the last powerful way that you can use your camera on attack. Now, the next ability we have to talk about is Admiral Akbar's Trapwire, which is incredibly important to master because it embodies Cypher's most powerful defensive weapon. Now, before we give you tips, however, here's some general information that you might not realize. Someone that walks into your trapwire will make an audio cue, and you'll be able to see them through walls, but there will be no red text that pops up on your screen that someone destroyed your trapwire. Now, if someone actually physically destroys it with an ability or a weapon, it will have an audio cue with Cypher saying something, and it will pop up on your screen, trapwire destroyed. Now, this is an important distinction to make because if you are in a team fight or there's a lot of firing going on, sometimes you can miss the audio cue and you don't see it visually. So if you're not paying attention, or if you're not looking at your mini map to keep track of what trapwires are still up, you could definitely miss these kinds of things, which is really bad because then you're gonna get flanked, your whole team's gonna die to the flank, and then everyone's gonna yell at you, and then you're gonna cry, and yeah, it's just gonna be a big mess. So definitely keep this in mind. Now, the next thing you gotta do, and this is a pretty obvious one, but people are still getting it wrong, and it's getting the right height level. Sometimes enemies have mad hops, or they could just limbo under it. Now, this is one that almost everyone has at this point, but what people are not doing is they're not keeping the surrounding area around their trapwire in mind. If there's elevation like box or ramp or anything like that, a lot of players can jump over the trapwire without triggering it, which of course is the worst possible scenario because then you don't know that enemies are flanking you, and you think that you're safe from a flank because your trapwire is still intact. Now, you need to be extra diligent when enemies have characters like Jet, Omen, Raze that can all get over even the perfect trap. So definitely keep in mind when the enemies have these characters on their team. Now, this actually moves on to a very interesting point that enemy characters can actually dramatically change how you place trapwires in the first place. For example, let's say the enemy team has the most balanced character in the entire game, Raze, on their team. That Raze is going to destroy certain type of traps if they're near angles that players often hold. For example, let's say you are loading up inside of hookah with traps, which is typically fine, but doing so up against a Raze who spams her paint shells into hookah will get them destroyed and get you no value. So that's really interesting because whether or not an enemy has a Raze or they don't have a Raze can dramatically change where you're putting your trap wires in the first place. Now, the next important note is that trap wires can stick to many surfaces that are not perfectly flat. You have to get crafty with these trapwire locations because enemies are getting better and better at not walking into your trapwire and just shooting it and you getting no value. There are many unorthodox places you could put a trapwire that could prevent a choke or angle push without connecting it from one flat wall to another flat wall. Come on, we got to put some curves in there. Now, keep in mind, though, that these are going to be constantly changing because of how Riot is balancing the game. So you need to be just proactive about trying out different spots within a game. And then keep in mind that every time you use one type of trap spot, you should be mixing it up again and again. You never want enemies to get a fix on where you put the traps because then they're just going to be able to shut it down so easily. Hidden information is definitely key here. Now, last up, keep in mind that Trapwire is one of the best abilities to combo with allies. I know, working with your teammates, kind of gross, but you know, we gotta do it. Anyways, as an example, if enemies trigger your trapwire that's set up at the hookah entrance and raise those paint shells through teleporter on bind, that could be one small example, but there are so many different examples of being able to combo a trapwire trigger with abilities and even ultimates. Now, everyone knows how good CYPHER cages with trapwire. I don't really have to go into that. Typically, these abilities go hand in hand. But if you use every single CYPHER cage with the trapwire, it can actually prevent you from getting just the raw value from Cage because Cage is a really powerful ability as well. You see, Cage is the only smoke that enemies cannot push through or else they give up information. This makes it insane for blocking off choke points and changing position, because if you throw a smoke, for example, in a choke point, right, and you try to rotate, enemy phoenixes can flash out of the smoke, enemies can just rush through the smoke. There's so many things that can happen that you can get shut down during a changing of positions. Cypher Cage, however, if enemies try to push through, you get that perfect information so you can instantly punish them. Even if there's no trap wire, you still know that they're in the cage. You still know when they cross through that choke point. This is why most tournament players will use one cage with a trap, which they will be in position to follow up on if enemies get trapped by it, but they will save their secondary trap just for information and not for follow-up, and they'll save one Cypher Cage just for personal use in a situation, within a situation, for rotations or to block off a sightline or block off a choke point while the regroup or get into position. Now, Cypher Cage and Cypher's general lurking playstyle is why Cypher is a character that actually gets a lot more value than others out of the Phantom versus the Vandal. Whether or not you think one weapon is better than the other, Phantom is definitely very powerful when combined with Cypher Cage. You see, one of the best attributes about a silenced weapon is that the spray cannot be seen at all. If you're spraying at an enemy through your Cypher Cage, or if they're in it or even outside it, they cannot see where the weapon is coming from if it's silenced as opposed to unsilenced. So being able to spray into your cage when you get that sound detection, or just spray people when they trigger your trap wire, this is all extremely important because you can get kills without revealing your location. Now, last up, we got to talk about the general playstyle of Cypher, the macro strategies. So, Cypher is automatically going to be more powerful on defense. It is Cypher's job to prevent pushes, stall, gather info, and make it basically impossible for the enemy team to set up favorable rushes. In fact, Cypher is probably one of the biggest reasons why rush is not viable at high-level play at all. Now, because of Cypher's nature, however, sometimes enemies will avoid a Cypher's strongest point and will rotate only after they secured other picks or gotten you to rotate off. This is exactly why lurking is extremely powerful on Cypher. Now, if you don't know what lurking is, this is where you leave your camera on site to still gather information about a push on that site, but you push up and plant yourself between an enemy and their potential rotation. Imagine an enemy that's pushing the A side of split, right? What you can do is you can push up silently through mid and up through sewers and stay in sewers. But in sewers, you place Cypher Cages and trap wires, and essentially what you're doing is creating a bottleneck or a squeeze on the enemy that cuts off possible rotations. So if enemies want to rotate off, they will run right into your positioning. Now, the job of a lurker is not to fully flank, especially Cypher. He doesn't have that many tools to fully flank like someone like a Phoenix or a Raze. All you want to do is stop rotations and cut off flanks from the enemy. Now, the last most important thing about Cypher is that you should try and mix up your locations as much as possible. I know that some positions and points on defense are inherently weaker for Cypher, like split A over split B, but the element of surprise is the strongest factor when playing Cypher. If you only play B, for example, enemies can use utility like Shock Dart to clear out traps or just ignore the site altogether. They can also slow walk through multiple choke points and never get caught by your trap wire. As long as you make sure to try to get value out of every single one of your abilities, be creative, and mix up what you're playing, you're assured to get so much value on Cypher, enemies will absolutely hate going up against you. Speaking of hate though, if you hate that one guy on your team that constantly flashes you, never calls his flashes, and as you turn the corner, you get flashed by him and end up dead, then you gotta smash that like and subscribe button and let me know in the comments down below. We have all had that guy, and it's the worst kind of teammate. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Coach Mills. See you next time.